Again, John Moore.
Okay, well, we're going to, in just a few moments, have a small exercise. If you don't have your spouse here, you're not married, then, you can just run around the block or something for a little bit. But, no, well, you'll be okay. But we do want to kind of intersperse a few things along the way this morning and this afternoon to kind of break it up, because it gets tedious listening to the same guy over and over, believe me. But I do want to mention a couple of things before we move on to item number 2 there. And that is with regard to communication, and we touched on it earlier, but the second part of communication has to do with listening, right? We're not really communicating if no one is listening. The whole process of communication is really, really difficult and challenging. Some of you may have seen models of communication before where you have a sender who has an idea and they want to communicate that idea to a receiver on the other end. And the communicator, though, has to stop and think about what's going on in their head. How do I express it? What words do I use? I'm not even sure I know what word to describe, especially with regard to feelings. Feelings are even more difficult, right? I have a concept about how to build something. I can maybe describe it. But how do I put into words what I'm feeling? That's challenging. But if we find the right word, and then we got to figure out how to transmit it. And as I transmit that word or that information, is that person going to understand the meaning of the word? Because words can mean all different kinds of things, right? And especially if the tone is affecting the meaning of it. And then as I transmit the language, whether it's written or spoken, sometimes there's literal noise. We were talking about that earlier, about the literal noise that can affect the interpretation. We don't quite hear it correctly, like my dad always would intentionally jumble up what my mother was saying or whatever. She'd say, Grady, can you take out the trash? And he said, what about the fireplace ash? I didn't hear you. He would always just, turn it around, whatever. But sometimes he literally didn't understand. He heard it, but he didn't understand it. And sometimes we can hear something audibly but not understand it because there may be literal noise or the receiver has internal noise, right? We're already upset about something and we hear it and maybe we take it in a bad way because of bad things that were happening to us during the day, or we interpret what they're saying as an attack, like maybe we've been attacked at work and so now you come home and you feel that way. Sometimes it's really difficult, but what we have to do on our end as a receiver, the second component of communication, is to really work hard at listening. Now, why is it so hard to listen? Can someone tell me? Why is it hard to listen? Yes. Oh, exactly. One of my former students. Why is it so hard to listen?
You got other stuff going in your head.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of other things going on.
We tend to be self-centered and we care about what we want to say next rather than what they're currently saying to us.
Yeah. There's lots of reasons, right, about why it's hard to listen. And one of them has to do with the fact that sometimes we're gathering information just enough to be able to defend ourselves, and we're not really hearing the entirety of the message. Sometimes it's just physically hard to listen, as you know, right? Sitting in an audience all day, and then maybe if you're at work and you're hearing all of this, and then you come home and now you're intended to just, expected to just sit down and get into a very, very deep conversation. It's hard. It's challenging. Our mind has a lot of opportunity to think about other things. The mind is a complex machine, and it can process tons of information in a few seconds. And so if someone is slow and trying to communicate what they want to say, our mind can get distracted by all kinds of things. So we really have to invest energy in listening. And listening, to me, in a relationship, this is the most important thing, is that we listen to understand. If we want to disagree, we can get there a little bit later on. But the first thing I have to do is listen to understand that I fully understand what they're trying to communicate and feeling at the time. We've sat with couples before, and I will have them, maybe a guy trying to explain to his wife or vice versa, the frustration or the feeling or what it is that they're concerned about and have them say it to the other person. Then the other person's job is to repeat back exactly what was said. But y'all probably know where this is going, right? How many times does it happen that the other person who was supposed to be listening said, so what I heard you saying is, when this person said, I'm frustrated because I feel like I'm not being listened to, and they say, so it sounds like you're really upset at me and angry because you think that the other day, and they start adding all this stuff into it, And that's not what they said at all, right? Or they add a couple of words in, or they miss something. And I have to say, now I want you to listen again. Your job is to repeat back exactly what they said, and don't add to it. Don't take away from it. There's just this temptation to hear with prejudice or to hear in a way that we want to hear. And it takes a lot of work to listen. This is why many relationships struggle, because they don't invest the time. But what's the payoff? What's the payoff? If we work hard at listening, if on the other hand we're working hard at trying to find the right things to say and say them in a good way, you know what the payoff is? Awesome. It's huge. We all want to be heard. We all want to be understood. And if we're communicating like adults and not like children or as parents, it is absolutely marvelous. You get closer, you understand, you work at things. There's another, in the psychological world, they call it, it's a theory, and I don't really operate out of it. It's just, I like the framework of communication they use. It's called transactional analysis. And basically, it's the communication pattern that says we communicate as either parents, adults, or children. Pack. And I usually have couples say, make a pact with each other. How are you going to communicate to each other? Is it going to be as a parent, as an adult, or as a child? Those of you who are school teachers of young children, I want to ask you to raise your hand. I know that we've had some in the past year. Martha was one. Okay. Did Martha ever come home to you, Rob? Don't answer this question. When she was teaching school and come home and talk to you like she was talking to her children all day long? Now, Rob, I would like for you to take out, okay, right? We get into a mode of how we communicate. Those of you that are parenting all day long, and your husband or your wife comes home, and then all of a sudden you're in that mode with your spouse, I can tell you it's not going to be received very well, is it, right? We don't like to be treated as children. But on the other hand, some of us grew up with a large family, and we learned to communicate with our brothers and sisters by fussing and fighting and arguing, and then we took that into our marriage. We were acting like children and communicating like children. How do adults communicate? In a relationship, we need to be adult to adult, not parent to child or a parent to parent, but adult to adult. And adults see a problem, and they work at solving it. Yes, it's different than, and you just talk about this when I was on the school board, and we would think about the 7 of us trying to work together. Well, it doesn't do any good for a school board member to say, I don't like your idea, so that's stupid, I'm not going to vote for it. I mean, that's, what good is that going to do? We need to listen and hear. We may not always agree. Now, I know in marriage, it's different because there's a lot more emotion involved, typically, right, between the two people than there is in a school board meeting. But if the goal is resolution, if the goal is our working together on some project, and we understand the need for that in the business world, why can't we understand the need for that in our homes? Of two people trying to solve a problem, working together. Yes, there are emotions involved, but working to make sure that the emotions don't get out of hand where we act like children. It's a difficult thing, but let's work on that. Listening, communicating carefully, the content, how we say things, and then as we do it, watch out for this. Because anger gets in the way of a lot of relationships. Anger puts people on the defensive. and it causes them to erect these walls, like I mentioned a moment ago. And when the walls are there, we aren't transparent, we aren't vulnerable, and thus we don't really find out what the real issues are and get close to each other. Let me say this also. When you are angry, I want you to ask yourself, why are you angry? Rarely is our anger, in my estimation, justified. There is righteous anger. God gets angry. Jesus was angry when he looked upon the hardness of the hearts of those sinners and the way they were behaving. But let's make sure that when we are angry, that number one, we don't sin in our anger, like Paul says in Ephesians 6. Do not sin in your anger. It's okay to be angry. It's a natural emotion, but don't sin in it. And then secondly, ask, is my anger justified? Because sometimes, and I would say a lot of times, our anger isn't justified. And here's the word I want you to remember with regard to this, because it will help you to sort of, lower the room temperature, as it were. And it's the word gift. I want you to use it as an acrostic, the word gift. When you are angry, I want you to give a gift to your spouse by remembering this. Am I angry because I am guilty? I feel guilt about this situation? Sometimes, because anger is sort of like a defense mechanism, right? It's a way of covering up what the real problem is. And sometimes people get angry because they're guilty of what they've done. Right? If you're hiding something, often said, we were talking about this last night in regard to, when people have their phone and all of a sudden their phone's lying out there and it goes off and the wife goes over to pick it up and the husband says, no, I've got it. This is mine. Leave my phone. Why are you always getting into my stuff? Are you angry? Are you really angry at her because she's being nosy? Or are you angry because you feel guilty about what she's going to find out? See, sometimes anger is the result of the guilt that we feel about the behavior that we're exhibiting or what's going on. And it's just a way of defending ourselves. Sometimes people get angry because they feel inferior. This is the gift we can give each other. Why is my husband so angry about this? Why is she so angry about this? Or he angry? Whatever. I've seen this happen sometimes, like at school, where students were talking about something in class and a student raises his hand and makes a comment about something, and then someone in class goes, laughs. That's dumb. And the other person gets angry. And they say, no, you're dumb. Okay? Why did they say that? Why did Eric ever say that? No, he didn't ever say that. Okay. Why did they say that? Because they felt inferior. We respond in anger oftentimes to protect ourselves because we feel inferior. A defense mechanism. So ask yourself, why am I getting so angry about this? Is it I'm fearful about something, and that's the F in gift? Fear is a way. I can remember one time, again, the same way. Carla can tell you a little bit about her situation sometimes, is that when she gets fearful, it kind of comes across as anger. And because she doesn't know about the situation and what's going to happen. And so sometimes people also then finally are fearful because of some trauma in their life. A young lady told us, her and her husband, she didn't understand why when he went up to kind of, go up behind her to just massage her shoulder, she would get mad at him. Until we began to talk and explore and find out that in looking back at her childhood, her stepfather sexually abused her for about 4 or 5 years. And that's where it all usually would sort of begin. When she would wash dishes as a young girl, had the responsibilities going in, washing dishes, he'd come up and start massaging her shoulders. Well, she hadn't connected the two. She just felt this anger about certain things that her husband would do, and she didn't know why until she began to realize it was the trauma in her life, that she was associating the two together. So sometimes we get angry for things that we don't understand. Sometimes they're justified, sometimes they're not justified. But the point is that anger can create this barrier that keeps us from communicating effectively, that can keep us from drawing close. Because what you tell me, whenever someone is angry, what do you tend to do whenever you face an angry person? Really one of two things. What is it? Fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. Anger, something happens, we either run away or we're going to fight back. Neither one of those really work very well in a relationship, doesn't it? Right? Because when we fight back, we end up not really resolving things, and we're fighting, running away from it. All I'm trying to say to you, think about what you're projecting. Think about how it comes across. Are you an angry person? Is your persona angry? Because anger drives people away usually. And it keeps us from really, getting down to some of the things that we need to get down to. So watch out for that. That's why God calls us to remember this. I have in the book, the marriage book that's online, and again, that's all free. Don't sell it at all, so I'm not trying to push something here. I'm just saying go and look at it. But in there's a section about anger, righteous anger and good anger and bad anger. And one of the things that I mentioned is that anger should never be petulant. It should never be demeaning. It should never be, profane. There are all these other things we need to think about in terms of Scripture. And I love the illustration about a counselor that told us a story one time about how there was this guy at work who was angry, and everybody at work knew he was always an angry person, and they were afraid to talk to him and so forth. And he finally acknowledged, okay, I've got an anger problem, but I don't know what to do with it. And part of it was he liked to be in control of everything, right? When he saw things outside of his control, he got frustrated. So what the counselor told him to do was, I want you to get 3 flags, and anytime you start feeling yourself getting a little frustrated, I want you to raise the first flag, right? And then when you get a little more angry, raise the second flag. And then when you're really angry, raise the third flag. And now let everybody in your office know this is not a good time to talk to the boss, right? Because he's really angry. I can see it building, whatever. And, of course, he called his secretary in and said, hey, would you go buy me some flags? And here's why. And she was like, I'm glad to go buy those flags, right? Be happy to. But what he found out is that every time he reached down to sort of pull up one of those flags, he was feeling frustrated. Guess what he did? Can't let this rule me anymore, right? Can't let this rule me. It was just something like to realize he was being ruled by something, and that was causing not only problem in his own life, but especially in relationships that he could control. If we recognize through the power of God that we can control our spirit, that we're not determined to be a certain way, that God can transform our lives, we can rid ourselves of the anger that has built up in the lives of a lot of us. So let's get rid of anger. Ephesians 4:6, Proverbs 29:2, and so forth, 4:26, commands us to be angry, but do not sin in that anger. What does your anger look like? Is it destructive? Is it demeaning? And so forth. Okay. Last thing I want to mention before I give you a little exercise, and then we're going to move on to some specific things about conflict resolution, is this. End with a story about a guy that we worked with for several years. And it really speaks to what I was talking about with regard to knowing that not only what we say, but how we say things is absolutely important. Man separated from his wife. He and his daughter were having trouble, and they'd actually put a restraining order on him because in his mind, he was simply trying to discipline his daughter over something she said, and that was very profane and ugly, and it was. And so they slapped a restraining order on him. And we're sitting in this room, the two of us, and he's looking me straight in the eye, and he says, I don't understand, John. I don't understand what's going on. they're all mad at me, and they're all after me. And he says, John, I would not hurt a fly. I am not kidding you. If I live to be a billion, I'll never forget that day. I would not hurt a fly. You know, of course, the whole time I'm backing up thinking, you're going to hurt me, aren't you? You know, well, I had to try to work on him, like I was saying earlier, say, okay, you know, I think I hear what you're saying. I really believe that in your heart you would not hurt a fly. But do you see, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? Well, it's just me being animated. Well, okay, it's just you being animated, but even to me, what that communicates is that you're going to pop something, you're going to hit something. And will what you hit be me? I'm afraid here. How do you think your wife or your daughter is going to feel when you're doing this? So his nonverbals weren't matching up with what he was saying. So let's think carefully about this. And what I want you to do now in this assignment, there's two things here. I'm going to give you all some index cards, give you about 10 or 15 minutes to work on this, then we're going to come back and talk about some things. But the first assignment doesn't involve the cards. It involves our having maybe a little fun, maybe it might be a little sensitive, I don't know for some of you. But I want each of you to ask your spouse, what are the nonverbals that I use when I communicate? Okay? What do you see me? And some of you may already know, right, what they are, and your nonverbals, but I want you to say, how do I communicate nonverbally? And then ask the other person. And see if you agree or not. Don't get any arguments in here, okay? We don't have time to do any marriage counseling right now. All right? I want you to let your wife observe or your husband observe in you what nonverbals that you have, that you may or may not know you have, okay? So do that. The second one is a lot more fun and yet helpful. And it involves this. It's called the 5-card exercise, and I'm going to give each one of you 5 cards because it's about communication and helping us today. I want you, each of you, to write down a particular need that you have that's important to you. What do you need? What's important to you? In your relationship with your wife or in general, you as a person. We all have needs, don't we? Things that make us feel good or happy or, just things that we need to make it through life. Particularly in the relationship now. Okay, I know we all need God, so don't put God down there. I know we all need God. But what do you need in the relationship? And I want you to write those 5 things down, one on each card. And then I want you, once you've written your needs down, to shuffle them. Shuffle them up, okay? And then give them to your spouse and ask your spouse to put them in order as to their importance. So let's say that I give them to Carla. She needs to take my cards and say, well, what is the most important need that John has right now? That he just needs to have met, what's really important to him? And when you do that, then after you do it, then share, give them to your spouse, let them then talk about, okay, I thought this was number 1, and they can say, no, that was really number 5, but it is important. Okay? Does everybody understand what I'm asking you to do? It's about communicating what's important to us and our needs right now. And even though it's a simple exercise, it's very helpful because we found a lot of couples enjoy this and appreciate it because maybe their spouse had no idea right now that they even had that need, number 1, or number 2, just how important it was. The other thing is that needs change over time. We've done this with couples who have come to us on a couple of different seminars, and they, after talking about it, they said, 2 years ago when we went to your seminar, need number 1 became need number 5, and vice versa. And that is because the husband was thinking more maybe, okay, this is an important need that she has. I'm going to work at trying to, figure out how I can meet that need. Did you have a question or comment about that? Yes, yes. So first part, just talk a little bit about what your verbals, your nonverbals are that you have, just for fun. And then move to this, okay? So if you want to, you can stay in here. You can maybe find one of the rooms around here and you'll talk about it. It's up to you. And then we'll take about 15 minutes to do it, then we're going to come back and talk about it. Maybe hand these out. Give 5 to each person, 5 to each person. If you're by yourself, not sure what to do. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so that's good. So Rob's going to take the single guys. Y'all go back here. And David. There's Rob. David's going to take the single guys, and y'all go back in there, and y'all can kind of talk about it in there. Okay? All right.